Hi there, and welcome to our seminar. This morning's topic is talking about an area in career development that we hear in Columbia Southern. We hear a lot of questions from students about. The prospect of interviewing is one of the things that drives most of our students a little bit crazy because they don't like the process. Nobody really does. It's just inherent part of the job search process. The questions we get from students quite often is, why do we even have to do this? Why can't I just be hired based on my resume? My resume shows that I'm obviously qualified for the job. Why do I have to go through an interview at all? Well, that's because job interviewing is a very different animal than your resume. They both ask this or answer the same question, why should I hire you? But they answer it from different perspectives. The resume answers it from a skills perspective. Do you have the skills necessary to do the job? But the interview attacks the same question from a different angle. It looks at whether or not you're a good fit for the organization and for the company. Every company is different in how it attacks and approaches the kind of employees it wants to hire. So today we want to talk to you a little bit about interviewing and talk about it from sort of a chronological perspective. We want to talk to you a little bit today about things that you should do before the interview even begins, some of the things you should do during the interview to ensure your success, and then come in and talk a little bit about things you should do after the interview. And I'm joined today by a couple of my career coaches, Robert Cunningham and Caitlin Garrison. And they will talk to you a little bit about each one of those first two topics, things you should do before the interview, things you should do after the interview. So we'll start off with Robert Cunningham. Robert?
Thank you, Keith. The first thing we'll cover is our objectives. In order for you to be successful, you must prepare for the interview. The types of interviews, interviewing questions, as well as what do you do after the interview. First thing you want to get your mind wrapped around is the preparedness of the interview. In order to be successful in any event, you have to prepare. So the first thing you want to look at is conducting research on the organization that you're planning to interview with. Learn as much as possible about that organization, their mission, their vision, their plans, the things they've done in the past. This will show the interviewee that you have a buy-in and you're showing them in a subtle way on why you want to work for their company. Because that's going to be one of your questions. Why do you want to work for my company? So the more information you have about the company, the easier that question will be answered. And that will pay huge dividends at the end. The next thing you want to do is know the location. I promise you, if you do not take that extra step, one day you will miss an opportunity because you may show up at the wrong place. I have personally done that. It was a big complex, many buildings, many suites, and I showed up at the wrong building, and guess what? I didn't get the job. So please, take that extra step, find out where the location is, drive there the day before. And so this way, you're at least 15 minutes early. The next thing that is highly recommended is practicing. The more you practice, the better you are. The more confidence you will build within yourself when you're in that interview. So definitely practice. Another tip is to prepare your environment and technology. As our world has changed in the last year, more and more interviews are being conducted over your video camera. So one thing that I recommend doing, first of all, is clearing your area of clutter. Making sure that the light is behind the camera and not behind you. You want them to see you and not the glow around you. Test your audio. Call up somebody. Do a video conference with a friend of yours to make sure everything's proper. At least 30 minutes prior to the interview, give it a one more check, because there's nothing worse than find out when they call is not working. So make sure you take that extra step. Make sure that you're prepared for that virtual interview. Another thing that's very important is treat each individual interview with your best outfit. Put on the very best outfit that you have for that interview. Make sure that you're dressing for success, not something that you wear going out, but make sure you're wearing something that represents how you represent that company. I always say that if you look good, you feel good, and when you feel good, you do good. It also shows that employer that you have pride in yourself. So the night before, lay out the clothes that you want. Make sure they're ironed. Make sure your shoes are shined. I know it sounds crazy over video, but you never know when you have to stand up and give a presentation. So dress as if you would if you were in person. And talking about being in person, if you have a panel interview that you know of, bring at least a couple extra resumes because you never know that a couple of your peers may be in that interview process as well. We have personally experienced that as well when we interview people. So I'd recommend bringing a couple extra resumes with you when you're in the interview. I'm going to turn it over to Caitlin now for types of interviews.
Thank you, Robert. I'm going to touch on a couple types of interviews that are the most popular. As Robert stated, phone and video are becoming more and more popular. But regardless of the type of interview, you need to prepare the same amount for every type of interview. So we're going to start with phone interview. Phone screenings are mostly used to gather background information and help narrow down the candidates to bring in for a formal interview. Some of the things that are usually asked during a phone screening are tell me about yourself, walking the recruiter through your resume, some salary expectations, and how did you find out about this company? How did you find out about this role? And why are you interested in this job? When can you start that position? And are you willing to relocate? Things of that nature. If you're asked for a formal interview, you can use this as an opportunity to ask who you will be interviewing with to assist in your preparation additionally. And for video interviews, again, these have become a very popular way of interviewing over the last several years and still growing in popularity. Why is that? Because of convenience mostly for both the interviewer and the interviewee. Some individuals who are applying for jobs are out of state. And in the simplest terms, it's somewhat safer of interviewing in this type of way. The types of questions that are asked during a video interview, though, will be the same as what would be in an in-person. So again, the same type of preparation level is needed. In in-person, you could have two types of in-person interview. One-on-one, which would be just you and the recruiter or hiring manager for the position that you're interested in a panel interview. Panel interview are multiple individuals interviewing. One of the most common questions that are received is, who do you address when speaking? The easiest way to remember that is to address the individual who asked the question to you directly. For in-person and video, it's always good to watch your nonverbal body language when you are in person. Are you talking a lot with your hands? Are you moving a lot? And things of that nature. So do keep in mind to not move too much. If you have to, place your hands in your lap. Hold on to those hands if need be. And now we're going to move on to some popular interview questions. So the STAR technique is something to keep in mind. And as you see here in the graphic, you need to prepare. Preparation is always key. Listen to the question that is asked and think of an example that can go along with the question that is asked. How you answer is situation. Describe that event or situation that you were in, and then explain how that task was completed. And then describe the actions you took to complete that task. Examples are always great. And then finish with what is the result of the actions that were taken from your efforts. So again, tell me about yourself is a very popular question. This is a ask to break the ice in the interview for both yourself and the interviewer. It helps the recruiter get to know you quickly because all they're really going off of at the beginning is what your resume says. But you need to always stay professional. Tailor this answer to the role and company that you've applied for, but don't use this as an opportunity to recite your resume back to the interviewer. And you don't have to go into extreme detail. You want to be memorable for the interviewer, but you don't have to tell your whole life story, but enough to pique that interviewer's curiosity. And also read the room. Don't talk too much. If you see that someone is nodding off or a little bit bored, go ahead and wrap up that answer. Try not to do it abruptly, but again, keep an eye on the room or the phone, the video. And why should I hire you? This is an opportunity to discuss your strengths and describe your most memorable selling points. Tailor it to the job description that you've applied for. So you can touch on the experience you have, technical skills, accomplishments that are related to the job description, any awards or education and training that you've had. If you have examples of those stories to tell, that's always a huge benefit. And then what would you consider your biggest strength and weakness? Sometimes this question is asked together and sometimes this question is asked separately. But always make your strengths and always make sure your weaknesses turn into a positive learning experience. If you're asked about this at the same time, start with your weaknesses so you can end on a positive note with your strengths. You should state your weakness, add that additional context. You have an example or a story, how this has made you grow professionally. That will give employers a positive insight to your level of self-awareness and commitment to professional growth. And always, it's difficult for people to talk about their strengths and weaknesses in an interview. But always use the job description as your guide, especially when you're selecting your strengths. And I'm going to go ahead and pass this on.
Okay, thank you, Caitlin. Appreciate that very much. As you can see, there is a lot to interviewing. It is not a simple process by any stretch of the imagination. But one of the things that people have the most trouble with is sometimes what happens after the interview is even over. One of the last questions that an interviewer will ask you is typically, what questions do you have of us? And what you ask them sometimes says as much to an employer as what your other answers to the other questions were. So there's a couple of things that you should never ask an employer. One of those things would be, what's my salary going to be? Or what is this job pay? Or something like that. It's also not appropriate to ask about company benefits at that particular time. There are a lot of reasons why you shouldn't do that, but in a nutshell, it just does not give you in a very good bargaining position to be asking those kind of questions right now. So those kind of questions you should never ask an interviewer. But what the kind of things you should ask an interviewer are things like, what are the next steps in the process? To try to get a timeline from your interviewer as to what their hiring process looks like. They might say, well, we're going to interview candidates for the next couple of weeks, and then we'll get together and make a decision. Well, that should give you a timeline for your post-interview follow-up. And post-interview follow-up is one of the things that very few candidates ever do. They think once the interview is over, they get back in their car and they drive away and leave, that the process is over. And in actuality, the process is not over, especially if they're going to take 2 weeks to interview candidates and then make a decision. They're going to forget about you in 2 weeks, not because of anything you might have did or didn't do. It's just time passes on. And this is not the only part of their job. And so they have other things that they're working on. And just the demands of day-to-day work mean that you're going to get kind of buried behind other interviewees and buried behind other projects and other commitments. And it's not going to work to your advantage. So it's good to have a good post-interview follow-up strategy to find out what the kind of things that you should be doing after the interview is over. So the first thing that I tell students to do is once the interview is over, you want to get in your car and drive away. For heaven's sakes, don't do what I've seen some interviewees do, try to change clothes in the car, the parking lot. Get in your car and drive away so they can't see you through the windows. And be sure and take advantage of some of those. Get in your car and drive away. Oops. And find yourself a nice secluded spot, well lit, and sit down with a notebook and start debriefing yourself. Make a note of the questions that they asked and make a note of the answers that you gave, good, bad, or indifferent. And then as you sit down and sort of debrief yourself, that will give you the information for you to go home and write a good quality thank you letter. Whether it's a thank you email nowadays or a more formal thank you letter, however that sort of manifests itself, you want to put information. You never want to sort of do a generic thank you letter. You don't want to say, hey, thanks for the interview, it was great. You want to go into some detail about the interview. And so this information that you've written down, debriefing yourself, is the information that you'll put into the thank you letter or the thank you email to show that interviewer that, number one, you listened to what was said, and number two, you remembered what was said, and number three, that meant something to you. And so it also gives you the chance to enhance answers that you thought you gave that were really good. And like everybody in every interview, there'll always be answers that you will sort of kick yourself later and go, I wish I'd done that answer better. But then now the thank you letter gives you a chance to kind of do some damage control, to rebuild that answer. So if you think of an answer later that's really a better fit for the question that was given, you can use this as an opportunity to kind of enhance that answer. But you set up that thank you email and you send that within 24 hours after the interview is over. Do not ever do the thank you letter before the interview or just immediately after the interview is over, because that shows the employer that you haven't put any thought into it. You're just doing it as an automatic impulse. You need to go home, think about it, take information from the interview, put it into the letter, and show that employer that that actually means something to you. Once you have that letter sent, now it's time you're ready for your after interview follow-up. Now, when you ask the question, what's the next steps in the process, if they said 2 weeks, that should tell you what you should do. Follow-up communication is very important. I typically tell students you should follow up one contact approximately every 7 to 10 days or 5 to 7 business days. And you really shouldn't do much more than that, because if you start doing too much contact, it will kind of feel like you're stalking them a little bit, and they won't appreciate that at all. But if you don't do enough, it gives them the chance to kind of forget about you once again. So you want to make contact, whether it's by phone, by email, and just sort of touch base and say, hey, just want to see how the process was going. If you needed any additional information from me, and that's your follow-up communication. And you want to maintain that and keep doing that until you have reached a conclusion, either good, bad, or indifferent. That's how you know when the interview is over, once you finally find out what the decision has been made. So just want to take some time today. I want to thank you for the opportunity to meet with you and to teach you a little bit about interview skills. We hope you have a great day. Thanks very much.